Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be doing a little bit of a comparison between the different craft mats that I have and use for different purposes, the whys and the whens. So here we are taking a look at the mat that you typically see, which is just a regular old self-healing cutting mat. And I use this for filming because usually you don't have too much of a glare, even though you have a little bit there. And it's just basically my work surface. So obviously you can use your craft mat for this. Here I'm just testing out the stamping because there is just a little bit of a give to the mat itself. You typically get a good impression each and every time that you stamp with an acrylic block. It is, as far as I can see, heat resistant as well for your heat gun. So I haven't had any warping or bubbling or anything like that, and I use my heat gun quite a bit. So that is always a plus as well. Another plus is the fact that it's pretty stable. It doesn't move around. So it's got not really grip on the bottom, but to the point where it's got enough anyway, where it doesn't really shift around on your work surface. So it stays put. As far as cleaning, I find it pretty easy to clean, even though mine is very old and stained, as you can see. I desperately need a new one, just for appearance reasons. But I typically just use a paper towel and sometimes some rubbing alcohol when I have some residue from my Copic markers. So that is the mat you typically see. The mat that I use the most of that you don't normally see is the Tim Holtz glass media mat. And the reason for that is the glare. So you can see that I have a big glare right there, and I don't want that to be distracting for you guys, which is why I don't use it in videos. So there's a lot of hype with this. You can see that it is all tempered glass. We have off to the right hand side, we have a little palette that's built in, as well as a mat on top of it, which is replaceable, by the way. So lots of things that you can do with this mat. It is obviously okay for cutting. It's a very hard surface. But you're not going to shatter it. It's very stable, I should say. So you can definitely cut on it. It's not going to leave any streaky lines, not that I can see anyway. As far as the stamping, it is a rock hard surface. So I'm okay with that, but I know a lot of people like to have a little bit of give on whatever surface they're stamping on. But you can see here that I got a very good impression, even stamping on a very hard surface. It is also heat resistant because it is tempered glass. There's not a whole lot you can do to this surface here. It is pretty indestructible as far as I can see unless you smash it on the floor. Um, so have no problem with heat. The only thing is will want to remove that white mat that has little sticky back to it before you use your heat gun. Also, there are little things, I don't know what they're called, but they're little things on the bottom of the mat that prevents it from sliding around on your work surface. So this is probably the most stable out of all the mats that I use. Now it is waterproof as well, so you can do some techniques on here. I'm just going to squish out some distress oxides here and spray that with some water. And you can see that I have some pooling. So you're going to get a different result depending on the mat that you use, but this one kind of pools together. I'm just going to dip my card panel into here and pull that up, and you can see that that works beautifully for a watercolor background. Of course, it would look better if I use multiple colors. So this is super easy to clean up. I'm just going to use a wet paper towel. I know that if you have any residue from adhesives or any other thing, you can use alcohol, rubbing alcohol. You can use hand sanitizer. There's a number of different things. Like I said, you can't really ruin this mat. So you can also use this as a palette for any of your watercoloring techniques. So over here on to the right hand side, they have these little squares that are part of the mat, even though it's a completely smooth surface. But you can use it as your palette to kind of keep your colors separated. So I'm just kind of scribbling out some Zig Clean Color Real Brush pens off to the side here and coming in with a damp paintbrush just to kind of let you see how this works perfect as a watercolor palette, regardless of what watercolor medium you're using. You could probably even use, in fact, I know that you could use just regular watercolors that come in the tubes, Daniel Smith, Arteza, whatever you have. You can squirt them right onto your mat. And again, just a damp paper towel, as long as it's a water resistant, or not a water resistant, water reactive medium, you can just dab that up with a wet paper towel. So super, super easy to clean. Um, Probably my favorite out of all of them. And like I said, this little white mat is replaceable. So next we are going to move on to something that's a little bit newer to the market. This is the Waffle Flower uh, wet medium mat, I think it's called, but I'll link it below. This is made from silicone, and I'm sorry that the lighting is so bad here. But again, this has a little bit of give to it, so it's going to give you pretty good stamping here. This is made from silicone, so you can kind of fold it up and fit it wherever you need to to fit it when you're not using it. You have a smooth surface in the center as well as some little areas for a palette there. Obviously, you cannot use a craft knife on this or else you'll cut directly through it. However, it is heat resistant. So if you are heat embossing or if you want to dry something, as long as the surface that's underneath it, so as long as your table that's underneath this mat is heat resistant, so is the mat. So you shouldn't have any issues with this. This is the same materials that people bake with. There's baking dishes made out of the same material, so that they go in the oven, so you're pretty safe. So I'm going to try the same technique that I did for the glass media mat here, just squishing out some distress oxides. You can see that this spatters a little bit more than on the glass media mat, which I'm okay with. I'm going to dip my cardstock in, and I got very similar results. However, I do have those spatter marks, which I personally like, but it will give you a little bit different of a result than that really super smooth surface of that glass media mat. I'm going to use a microfiber towel that's completely stained, and I'm kind of just going in one direction. Swipe it back and forth. Yes, I do have some cat hair on there. If you get pet hair on here, it's very difficult to get up. So just keep that in mind, but it won't affect your watercoloring at all. Now here I'm going to use these little wells here for my watercoloring. Again, just going to scribble out my zigs here and go in with a damp paintbrush just to kind of see how this works as a paint palette. And I like this because they are actually separated. There's some texture to the mat that kind of divide your colors. Again, just going in with that microfiber towel and dabbing that up. Super easy to clean. It does shift around a little bit on my table, but that will depend on the table that you work with, or work on rather. It may not shift for you. For the most part, it's not supposed to, but I have a super slippery table, so that's my problem. So overall, super cool mat to work with. It will stain, but again, that won't affect your watercoloring at all. So next we're going to move on to the more traditional Ranger craft mat. So this comes in a roll and you can buy multiples. You can buy these in different sizes, but this is just the standard size. So this goes right over your table. It protects your work surface and allows you to do some techniques with watercoloring. Keep in mind that whatever material or whatever table you're working on that's what basically you're working on. So if you don't have any give to that table, you're not going to have any give with your stamping. Again, this doesn't affect me at all because of the inks that I use, but certain inks you may have more of a problem. Obviously, can't use your craft knife. Done it before, accidentally trying to be super careful, and I wasn't careful enough. It is heat resistant. Again, just making sure that the surface that's underneath this mat is also heat resistant, but the mat itself is. Next, we are going to do some techniques here, and you can see that it does slide around, by the way. But I sometimes tape mine down with some washi tape on all four corners to kind of avoid that problem. So again, I'm going to squish out some of my distress oxides, squirt on some water, and you can see that instead of spreading out, this kind of beads up. So I'm getting very similar results on the cardstock itself, but you can see that it kind of squishes out the sides where the other two didn't really do that much. But you're going to get very similar results. Get a really cool background. Would be better with multiple colors, but you get the idea. Again, super easy cleanup. Just going to spray down with a little bit of clean water. Go in with a paper towel. You can use a baby wipe. You can pretty much use anything here. You can also use this as a palette. So again, bringing in my zigs here. The only difference is that you can't see it. Depending on the color, you can't see it. So that makes it a little bit more challenging, but it still works for a palette. And again, just being able to pick that up with a wet paper towel is always a plus. So next we're going to move on to probably my second favorite, and what I always used to use is the grid paper pad. And there are two, as far as I know, two different companies that make this. I have the one from MFT, and you can see that it's a little warped because I put my stamp chamois on it. But this is basically just, I believe it's 50 sheets of grid paper into a big, huge pad here. And when your paper gets gross and completely full of ink, you just tear it off and move to the next. Obviously, can't use your craft knife. It is heat resistant because it is paper, but it will warp. So I don't recommend you using your heat gun on it because you'll have similar results to what I have now. You do have the grid lines, which makes it super easy. You can also kind of, what I like about it is if I need to make little notes about what I'm doing or measurements or anything, I can just write it down on my mat and it's there for reference throughout my whole project. And like I said, it gets gross, it gets inky, just tear it off and go on to the next one. The MFT has the binding, I think it's called the binding that's closest towards you. The Simon's stamp is further away from you. So that is the grid paper pad. Last, we are going to move on to traditional Reynolds freezer paper, which is what my mom always uses and she likes to use actually. And you get actually very similar results than you do with the Ranger craft mat. So there are two sides to the freezer paper. There is a shiny and a matte side. You are going to want to work on the shiny side. But you can see what happens when you take that off the roll. It just rolls itself back up. So you're going to want to put something either heavy on all four corners, or like I do sometimes, just take some washi tape or some post-it note tape or something removable and just stick down all four of my corners so they don't keep rolling up on me. But like I said, this will be very similar to the Ranger Craft Mat in that it has a very similar surface. So it is waterproof. You are going to have similar stamping results to all of them. Just keep in mind that your surface is going to be as hard as the surface underneath it. You do not want to use your craft knife naturally because, after all, this is paper, so it's going to go directly through that paper, but it is heat resistant. So you can use your heat gun directly on the surface of this and not have any issues. In fact, your freezer paper doesn't even really warp, even adding heat to it, as long as you're working on the shiny side. So moving on to the distress oxides here, same thing as I've been doing with all of the waterproof mats here. Just going to squish a little bit of this out and squirt that with some water. And you can see that I get that beading just like I did with the Ranger Craft Mat. Exactly like I got with the Ranger Craft Mat. And you can see, again, just like the Ranger Craft Mat, it does kind of squish out the sides when I push down on my card panel and got very similar results once again. So I think a roll of this is super cheap and you can continue to use the same piece over and over. So if you need to do 100 watercolor panels, you can with the same piece, just wiping it down each time with a damp paper towel and you are good to go. Same thing with the palette. Again, using my zigs works great as a palette, and the fact that it's white makes it easier to see the colors you're working with. So that is definitely a plus as well. Super easy to clean up, and as long as you have that tape down, it's not really going to shift around too much. And the longer it sits, the flatter it'll lay. So that is a look at all of the mats and I guess you could call materials that I use. Now we just want to do a quick comparison with the pros of each one of these mats as well as the price. So for the cutting mat, it's great for stamping. It's heat resistant. You can obviously cut on it. It's pretty stable in the fact that it doesn't shift around too much. And for the most part, I would say that the cleanup is maybe not super easy, but pretty easy. On Amazon, I pay $7.08 for this mat, and it does last me quite some time. I do record and film with mine, so maybe it doesn't last quite as long as the typical crafter that doesn't really necessarily care what it looks like. For the Tim Holtz Craft or Tim Holtz Glass Media Mat, great for cutting. It's heat resistant, it's stable, it doesn't shift around, it's waterproof, and it's super easy cleanup. We have a couple of different stores. For the most part, they're all within a few dollars of the price, but definitely Amazon is the cheapest. As of right now, Amazon always changes their prices, but I will link it below just in case you want to grab that before they sell out because they tend to sell out in waves. Next is the waffle flower mat. So this is great for stamping, got some give to it. It is heat resistant as long as the material that's underneath it is. It is naturally waterproof, super easy cleanup as long as you have a microfiber towel, and it's stable. It doesn't shift around. Again, several different prices here. Amazon this time seems to be the most expensive, but I will link it below as well as the link for Simon Says Stamp as well as scrapbook.com. Next is the Ranger Craft Mat. So it's heat resistant, it's waterproof, and it's super easy to clean up. It's super easy to store too because it just rolls up. Similar prices between Amazon, Simon, and scrapbook.com. However, there's an alternative that I'll link below. They're actually baking sheets, and you get 5 of them for $8.69, which is typically what I use. I can cut them apart, and I don't care because I hardly spend any money on them at all. So I will link that below in case you guys are interested in trying this out. It's a much more affordable option. For the paper pads, it is great for stamping. It doesn't shift around too much, and it's super easy to clean up because you just throw it away. Simon Says Stamp has a brand, so does MFT. Both the same exact price, very similar, same size, but I will link both of them below. Last, we have the freezer paper, which is definitely not a typical craft mat that you see, but I did have a lot of questions after the last video where I used it. So it is heat resistant, waterproof, and super easy to clean up because once again, you just throw it away. So on Amazon, it's $10.99 for a roll, and I think I've had the same roll for about 3 or 4 years now. I don't use it too often, but it'll last you a very, very long time. So lots of different options. I don't necessarily recommend getting all of them. I would say get whatever works for you for whatever style crafter you are. I hope this was helpful, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by and have a great day.